We need to pull back a little bit on this over-feminization of the world, over-feminization of the men, this massive idea that all men just need therapy and all the world's problems. No.
Masculinity is in the spotlight, from men's mental health to shifting gender roles to the influence of the online world. We've brought together some of the prominent voices online to get into the conversation. And just a reminder, the views shared here aren't those of SBS, but they are claims and opinions that are being debated online. Having lots of sexual partners is tied to your status as a man. Clayton, you're laughing, you're starting this one.
If I had to give one simple answer, no. I think if you're a man and you have what I class as like inherently manly traits, so like you're a man of pursuit, if you're a person of morals and principles, if you're doing it with the right intention, with being honest up front, is it needed to be a man? No. Can it make you better as a man? I think yes, I think there's merit to it, but I don't like the idea of a super high body count in women, if I'm completely honest, and I think it's probably hypocritical of me to say go sleep with heaps of women, because I also think I believe in purity and preservation. So
100%, yeah.
What do you mean?
With purity and preservation.
Yeah.
I personally believe and have the belief that the lower a woman's body count, the better for her and for her future partner. Like I've slept with my number, like my share of women, right? And had a great connection with them, and I don't look at a woman any less because of it. However, if it's going to be the mother of my children and she's going to be a representation of me, I don't want 20 other men able to say, yeah, I've been with her, bro. And if she is a chink in the armor, that directly affects every other area of our life, whether we like it or not.
There can be dickheads out there that have had sex with lots of women. I know plenty of those guys. Then there's also just humble guys who are just good-looking dudes that just got heaps of pussy, and they're legends as well. And then there's guys that haven't really had much sex, and they can be nice guys as well. I don't really think it's specifically linked to whether you're a strong, cool, masculine man at all.
The hypocrisy is something that really does baffle me. Like, why is it such an issue to some men that some women do want to sleep around, but then like one of their mates are sleeping around heaps? And they're like, oh, good job, man. But then to the girl, it's like, no, that's not on. And that's interesting. Like, I respect 100% what you're saying. You wouldn't want to be with an individual that has slept around, and I'm the same. But when it's within a friendship circle and a girl's getting bagged out for it, man, I don't care what you're doing. You do you.
Exactly.
Leave them alone. Like, it's a personal preference.
Doesn't bother me.
Yeah, that's fair for me.
I'm not going to try and break it down on an intellectual level. I just find a chick that's been with way too many guys, I find that unattractive.
She knows what she's doing.
But
that's great. She knows what she's doing. She's like experienced.
I don't want that.
Fantastic.
I want to be her first.
Who gives a shit?
If God willing said design your perfect woman and said put a body count on the chart of what she's.
I think God's busy, man. I think God's got bigger.
So Tarang, you said you don't care, but you said it doesn't matter to you. So let's say you had a magic button. Say they're identical twins and you get to choose this one or that one, and one of them's had, say, 100 partners and one of them's had 10. Is that going to affect your decision or not at all?
So I thought earlier that the chink in your armor analogy was a little bit medieval.
I thought that was weird to be honest. I didn't know what that was.
But then you came out with this. Look, I don't know. Like, it could be he, it could be she, it could be they. Like, I don't, but
I've hooked up with dudes.
The person.
You're not the only bi people here.
Yeah, I can't say I've ever thought about it in that way before. That the perfect person, because the perfect person does not exist, right?
Yeah.
I just think that something you said, Chris, I found really profound, which is that the way women will be judged, right, for being promiscuous in a way that men rarely, if ever, are, right? That kind of social conditioning and the acceptability of that is something that I have a problem with. Because to me, it's like we either judge everyone here or we judge no one. And I think
I agree.
When it comes to this, as long as people are safe and consensual, we shouldn't be judging anyone.
I agree with that.
Right?
It is double standards and it is misogyny. It's internalized misogyny. It's something that you're saying for you to date them, you need to have a requirement that you need to have a number next to you. And if you don't have that number count, I'm not going to date you.
Do you think he's a misogynist?
Hang on. No. Can I come back and do a question? What about the women that expect 6-foot men, over $200,000 salaries? They want muscles. They want this and that.
You're ticking all these boxes, man. Like, Scott,
I'm under 6 foot.
Easy for you to say.
Clear that up. But let's be serious here. Like, it's not fair in this day and age that women expect X, Y, Z out of men a lot of the time, and that is factual. And they're considered empowered women for wanting that. But then if a bloke says, "Oh, sorry, you've slept with too many men," we're the dickhead. No, hang on a sec. Like it's
As a
true,
bi man though,
very-
would you choose that if you're looking for a male partner and your male partner's had hundreds of sexual partners versus someone who's only had 10, does it make a difference for you?
I would not care
wouldn't care
as
at all?
long I would be dating this person, because I would actually, if they disclose that with me, that is fine. If they don't, I would not care, because I would not base my relationship with that person based on how many people they've slept with. Because I do think that aspect is very odd, and it stems from control and power. Because
What about
it
values,
has,
though? It's like if it's 5, 10, just to put it out there, I'm like, I can deal with that, I think. That's better. And again, I acknowledge this is judgmental, but it's not the number so much as the values that have to go in place. Because if she's a beautiful woman, she can sleep with 1,000 men in the space of a month easily if she wants to. What I'm interested in is purity, devotion, love, femininity.
The thing I struggle with is the idea that it's like pure or self-preservation around women. To me, that at its core signals an imbalance of power,
Yes.
perhaps control, or something remotely related to.
It's the same as a car. Like, this is a crude example.
Women are not cars, bro.
No.
Women
but
are not
men,
cars.
Do you take care of your car? Like, do you really, when it's yours and yours alone, we take a lot of
I
pride
don't want
in
other
it.
people driving my car, put it that way.
Not to say that she's less because of it, but in
Can I
terms
throw
of...
a
but it
massive
is.
curve?
It is inherently that.
Is it okay for you then to have a higher body count than a prospective female partner?
Ideally not, but the fact is, do I? And yes. So is it somewhat hypocritical for me to say it from a numbers standpoint only? Yeah, it is.
So
But
you
I'm
f yourself over because you're f***ing too much before, is that what you're saying? Like if you're trying to meet someone now and it's like
I'm
50,
fine.
you're like,
I
oh
think
shit.
I think men are only, if men do it with intention, we're only better from having multiple sexual partners. There's no downside for a man doing it because you're better at sex.
Just jumping in, can we hear from Mitch? I haven't heard from you.
I don't really want to contribute to this one. It's kind of derailed a bit. I think we move on.
Can I say one thing, please?
Yes.
As like a wrap up? What I find really interesting about this conversation is that the prompt was that the more sex a man has is an indicator of his status as a man. And we've wound up being a group of men who are discussing, with the exception of Mitch, who saw that it got derailed, talking about how much sex women are having as
The flip side to that is
I just think
almost every woman that I know in my circles does think a man that has had a lot of sexual partners is a higher value male.
Can we go back to Turong and finish this segment, please?
Sure.
Oh, that was all I was saying, was just that I think it's interesting that we've externalized and projected onto women rather than
That's because
going.
we're men, so we can talk about our experiences. So that's kind of how conversations
next
work.
prompt, please. Men are wired to be more aggressive. And Turong, I'll get you to start this one.
It is factually inaccurate. Meta-analyses across the world, across cultures, ethnic cultures, have proven time and time again that biology is not a predeterminant in humans of aggressive behaviour. Social conditioning and learned behaviours, or a feeling of a lack of power, result in men taking aggressive actions. But the idea that men are predisposed to be more violent, or that men are
Which study is
inherently
that? What
violent.
study said that?
So a meta-analysis means meta as in large.
I'll chime into there 100%. I reckon you are bang on in terms of men tend to be more violent when they are running from traumas, pains, whatever it may be. But for me personally, if someone was to step in front of my family and produce a threat, I will be a very violent individual, 110%. And if a man is not, I do not consider him a man. If you are not a man if you do not protect your family. And I remember I nearly got T-boned when my eldest son was 2 years old and the car nearly hit his door. And before I even knew it, I was out and I was about to pull the guy out of the car and there was no thought process to it. In my opinion, men have that. I think 98% would act. And if the 2% that didn't, I'd get their testosterone levels checked pretty quickly.
Exactly. Testosterone. Men are definitely wired to be more violent. It's just nature.
I wouldn't
It's
say
in
violent,
every-
I'd say protective.
Look, there is a biological response to testosterone that I think is not up for debate. I think higher testosterone produces higher levels of charged energy, which with unresolved trauma and shame can result in violence. I think in the modern day where there's far less moments where our life is at risk, we're not living in villages being invaded by swords and spears, that power is more readily channeled to building a career and other things that requires tenacity and perseverance, in which that genetic charge or predisposition for power comes as handy. But I don't believe that if we're kind of trying to draw the assumption of men are more violent, that's not true. I think certain types of men are violent depending on how they're raised.
I mean, look at every single sport. Rugby league, AFL, rugby union, UFC. UFC's like one of the biggest sports in the world that's driven by men. It's very obvious that men are much more violent. I think that's just silly to even ask that question, to be honest.
Biology may nudge, but it does not determine. In the sense that a person's response, regardless of their gender identity, to an external stimulus will be the product of many factors beyond solely their biology, right?
I'm keen to hear your take, Tarang, on the idea of the protector.
Yeah, this idea of being a protector gets brought up a lot, and I find it really fascinating. I don't think the idea of being a protector in as a holistic thing is a bad thing, right? But what I find interesting is why it always comes down to protecting from physical violence in a world that is now safer than it's ever been. There's less violence than there has ever been in Australia. So the idea of protectionism being so linked to the idea of being a man is really, really tricky, and always comes down to me, like, protecting from whom? And it's always, almost always other men, and we'll say things like, oh, we know what other men are like, rather than going, you know, we're trying to protect women from other men who are violent. We're trying to do this. Really, like, focus inward on our own shit, right? As a collective, like, what's our own trauma? What are our own histories? What's the shit that we're dealing with? What's the stuff that we're too embarrassed to say because it'll make us look gay or weak or effeminate? The men that I consider the toughest and the grittiest and the most manly are the ones who aren't afraid of those difficult conversations. They aren't afraid to actually challenge that idea that men need to be protectors and look at men more as being like allies to the community, allies to their family, and like standing beside, like, so they're like, I stand beside, you know, my wife, my partner, my woman, right?
But know
rather
when
than
to stand
going,
forward.
I stand above her or I stand as the head of the house, because that's not helpful.
So for me personally, I used to be a very violent teenager. I used to love a good brawl. I used to love hurting people. I used to love getting hurt because I was running from pain myself. Wow. Right? I'd numb my pain with alcohol, drugs, and fighting, and it was my go-to. And the only thing that sort of took me away from that was facing my own traumas, my own trials, my own tribulations, and sitting down and actually looking in a mirror and saying, hey man, you've got problems. And for me, my turning point was I got arrested for affray, assault police, evade police. I beat all the charges. Wow. But irrespective of that, like, just knowing that there was a chance of potentially going to jail and not being there for my family was enough to sort of kick me in the ass and say, you've got to change the way you're living. Like, you're running from something constantly by blowing out and getting angry at others. It's about reflecting, not reacting.
Men have a responsibility to step up and stop domestic violence.
Strongly agree. When I look at men who remain silent about things that their mates, their friends, their brothers or family members are doing, and they just don't want to get involved, like, that makes me look at them a certain way.
They're weak men.
Yeah,
They are
because
weak men.
violence against women is not something that we should only be making it a woman's issue. It's a man's issue. It's always been a man's issue because the majority of perpetrators that makes up the amount of violence against women and children are men. And that is a statistic that we're never going to be able to change unless we actually look within and say, hey, we have a problem. And I do think it takes stepping out, you know, within that comfort zone, you know, of being judged, or you don't want to upset your mate, you don't want to make them feel uncomfortable.
Don't point at me. I'm on your side on this one, man. I cannot stand domestic violence, and if I ever experience it, I will call it out, and I would never be friends with any man who commits domestic violence.
Yeah. I'm with you all the
Exactly,
way.
and we don't have to wait for your sister or mother or cousin or someone that you know to be a statistic of violence for you to then say, well, I now want to talk about it.
That's right. A lot of my friends, unfortunately, have been incarcerated, but even within the jail system, if you go in as a woman basher, you are almost as bad as a rapist and a pedophile. They are not hard, they are weak individuals, and if you see it, say something. Like, I think one of the problems why some people don't speak out is that I've personally seen arguments between couples in public settings, and obviously no one knows who they are, and a man will go and confront the other male who is being rude or obnoxious to the female, and the female will actually turn on the person that's coming to help her.
Look, I think that there's so many factors at play here. I came to be really involved in this particular area following the murder of my sister Nikita in 2015. She was 23 at the time, and I remember going to the coroner's court, seeing her on the table, having to identify her, and the doctor being like, she's not going to look how you remember because her face, she was stabbed, like, the report said no fewer than 35 times. with a meat cleaver. And I asked the doctor, I was like, what does that mean? And I almost had to fight him and be like, tell me straight what that means. And he actually leveled with me. He said, after 35, we can't tell what's a separate wound. Like that, so it's more than that. So it could be 60, it could be 100, but after that we can't tell. And as I educated myself and as I learnt more, and I've met with so many perpetrators, so many victim survivors, their families, we're losing the fight. We're going backwards. So 10 years ago, it was 1 in 4 men self-report using violence or abuse. Now it's 1 in 3, right? I'm thankful that more men are admitting to it, right? It is the #1 law and order issue for state and territory police officers. It is like overwhelmingly what they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And at the same time, the commissioners of police are saying it's underreported, right? Yeah. And so I think we're losing the battle because a lot of us, and I say us, like men, will think it's over there. We'll go, other men do it. We couldn't possibly do anything that condones it. Like you'll have a guy in a group chat who'll be consistently making off-color jokes about women, and we're like, oh, it's not a big deal. Or we're too afraid of being the kind of black sheep or speaking up. Yeah, and that's the tacit approval that these thugs need.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, they feed off. The fuel for them is the fact that they can get away with it. Because to them, it's about power and entitlement and control, right? And so my sister, like so many women, was killed in the context of separation. She tried to leave, right? And on average, it takes a woman 7 times to be able to leave. And we always ask, like, why didn't she leave earlier? Rather than going, what is it about this guy, right? That we all know, right? That we all see, that we kind of interact with in society. Someone might be a co-worker, heaven forbid it's a family member for any of us, but someone that we know enough that we're just like, yeah, there's something not quite right about him, but it's not our place to do anything. No one is intervening to go, hey mate, go talk to someone about what's going on inside before you hurt yourself or hurt another person. There's a study that was done and they found that one of the pressures that men in this age group that we're all in feel is that pressure to be dominant or strong, right? Even if we don't want to be, right? And it's these unrealistic expectations that we put on men that ultimately become their own undoing. It's about acknowledging that as men, we oftentimes are physically capable of causing more harm if we wanted to, and acknowledging that we have a responsibility, right? And if you consider yourself a protector, the worst thing you can do is be the kind of weak individual who projects rather than goes and gets help.
100%. I think that the thing I was going to say, right, first off, I want to say I'm really sorry for your loss, man. That is horrible. I wouldn't wish that upon anyone at all, and I hope that the perpetrator is spending the rest of his days inside jail. But the thing that I foresee being an issue, right, so a lot of men don't want to speak up because unfortunately there is a side of women that have been so heavily hurt that all men are now targets. If you see a man comment within these groups, they are attacked. You don't belong here. You don't believe us. Like, we choose a bear over you. And in my opinion, that creates a massive, massive divide. Women that have been hurt need to understand that not all men are their perpetrators. And at the same time, men need to understand that we need to approach and be there for these women in another way. And it's like you said, people ask victims, why does it take them so long to leave? It's not about why didn't they leave, it's about how can we help them leave.
Men have the responsibility to not only prevent but stop perpetrating domestic violence. I think we need to understand that domestic violence, as you would know, is more a conversation around control. That's why it's usually used as an instrument of coercive control. And so why do weak men feel the need to use unnecessary means to control their relationship? And I think there's also a conversation around DV that's not just physical violence, it's also sexual and emotional violence. I mean, I actually, before I touch a woman intimately, will ask her, hey, are you comfortable with me touching you there?
Seek consent.
Yeah, I mean, and that usually the first time we sleep together, and after that, I'm not robotically like, is this okay, is this okay, is this okay? But I do think that, men equate flirting with sexual escalation. Women usually, flirting for them is playful personality interaction and connection. And so often we can make women feel uncomfortable without knowing it by doing things that we assume is okay and they aren't. So I think a little check-in goes a long way to build safety. And when it comes to emotional violence, that's a real thing as well. Like, so often men will put offhanded comments knowing it's going to sting. I mean, I'm not saying this is just men that do this, but when we use our words, those things can be highly traumatic. And I know that seems like a soft comment to say, but some of the worst things that's happened in my life hasn't been anyone necessarily touching me, but the way that they've treated me and made me feel less than or very, very unsafe within being who I am. So we need to broaden that conversation
and to understand that over time, it's about diminishing that person's sense of self to the point where they become a shell of a person. Because it's much easier to physically harm someone when you break them down psychologically over a period of time.
It's about finding the missing middle as opposed to pushing people to the fringes. And, you know, instead of feeling like you need to hit someone or feeling you need to like freeze them out, it's about being a man, aka doing the work and knowing how to set a boundary. That's a normal, healthy adult thing to do. It's minimum standard. To be able to, if someone's doing something that you don't like, remain in yourself and say no. As opposed to you, or I'm now going to act like a child. No one should be able to evoke that out of you. No one. Unless your child is about to get hit by a car, you should not leave the state of being in your...
Cool, calm, collected.
In your castle at your home.
Yeah.
Traditional gender roles are the backbone of a healthy society.
I think it is a big claim to say that traditional gender roles is something that is a reflection of the current society. When we look at modern day, I don't think that structure exists because obviously there's so many things that encapsulate what we see a man is in this modern day. I do think, you know, this idea of having a structure did regress women and it did regress queer men and marginalized communities.
What others think? Like,
I think it's...
I'm looking at you, Chris. I don't mean to like ask you that.
Everyone's different. Like, I think you can't make a blanket statement like that. I was in construction for 10 years, and for me, my role as the father and partner to my fiance, right, was to provide and protect. So she could stay home with our children, she could take them to school, she could be there for them at home, and someone else wasn't raising my kids. Now, does that mean that everyone needs to do that? No. No way. But then you've got to think at the same point that so many people are now labelling masculinity as negatives. And that's another part that you've got to look at. Like, men are scared to be men because they're scared of being labelled by the greater population in some aspects.
Our society is better now than it was 100 years ago. That was built from traditional gender roles. I mean, the basis of literally any society is a man and a woman coming together, having sex and having kids.
I wouldn't blanket say society's better.
I suppose there was perhaps like a correlation there, but one didn't cause the other.
It's got us to where we are today, to be able to have these more flexible arrangements. That's what makes society better. Men working harder to protect and provide for their family, their kids and their partner. And I know some people are just born in a way where they're not into the male and female traditional gender role. That's fine. But I think the foundation of a successful society is men and women coming together.
That's especially like heteronormative, right?
Yeah.
When you think about it like
that's
that.
right. Heterosexuality is normal. The word heteronormative just is a buzzword when we all know that heterosexual relationships are by far the most common relationship in the world.
Can we hear from Tarang, please?
I think that some people may follow traditional gender roles, right? And that works for them. I also think that traditional gender roles historically haven't given men a lot of freedom to be things other than stoic and determined and strong and outwardly resilient. Real men cry sometimes. They feel shame, they feel guilt, they feel fear, they feel terrified.
But it's being able to express that makes you a man, in my opinion.
I think so. I think that we need that flexibility, not for women so much as for men, to be able to feel that they can express themselves, that they can be who they are in a way that doesn't hurt other people and helps them live and realise their full potential as human beings.
I think traditional gender roles are important because if you look at nature, I think we could all agree that masculinity is inherently associated with like pursuit, doing more, protecting, providing. No, it's not to say that women can't be, protectors and providers, but there's no man here that you put a kid in front of us and in a dangerous situation where that inner instinct in us doesn't want to come out and protect. That's inherently masculine. Women, on the other hand, it's nothing wrong, it's just not their strength or they're in their nature to do that. Look at what's inherently true, like whether we like it or not. Men are stronger, they're better providers, we are okay working longer hours.
It's very centered or like a lot to do with social conditioning, a social construct. We pretend like it works equally for everyone when it's not. I do think, the structure itself tells men to perform, Men spend a lot of time performing.
But that's your perception. Other people have a different perception.
True. Yes.
Most men I know would say, I'm not influenced by these societal norms or social constructs. That's just who I am naturally. I just want to be strong, simple, work hard, do normal things. That's just who I am.
Can I intervene here? I think it's very interesting what you just said. In terms of all your friends, they work hard, they do X, Y, Z, so you said, right? In terms of men's mental health being absolutely astronomical, so your friends, the ones that are happy to live in this day and age and be quiet and work hard for their families, they're the ones that are actually taking their own lives because they're not feeling comfortable enough to open up.
Mitch?
Yeah, I think coming back to the question and looking at data is probably a good place to anchor in. So, do men have better lives? Unequivocally, yes, in almost every metric, access to healthcare, etc. Has the role of men improved? No, it's gone backwards. We know that because there's more ambiguity. Suicide is at 75% of men to women. It's the leading cause of death between 19 to 55. 12 times more men are incarcerated than women. Men are twice as likely to engage in high-risk addiction behaviours. Men still don't have the capabilities to seek help and reach out and find the connection they need in order to better their lives. Women have done an amazing job at rewriting their playbook and their blueprint, and I think that was a great movement which has now been achieved. What's happened with men is we've ripped up the blueprint from provider protector and we haven't replaced it with something else. So we've created a generation of lost men, and there's nothing more dangerous to the world than lost men. So men are like, well, who the fuck am I then? Why isn't anyone telling me to find a healthy middle ground of what it means to be a protective, providing, responsive man in a modern context?
I know this divulges from the actual conversation.
Men have always been overrepresented in suicide, always have been. You brought up suicide between men from 19 to 55. Well, do you know why that is? That's because older men die of cancer. Young men die of suicide because they don't die of cancer and heart disease and things like that.
Actually, the men who take their own life most are between the ages of 45 to 60.
Yeah.
I think the real discussion is, and the important aspect is having a role. I think things go bad when you don't know your role. For example, if there's an Australian researcher that did a piece of work on what are the words men use to describe themselves before they take their own life. And the two main words that came up were worthless and useless. Which essentially means that a man's greatest need instinctually is to have value to the world, is to have utility, which is different from a female who are often better at feeling innate utility and value just for being alive. I think the big thing we've lost with men is, am I needed? What am I needed for?
There's a lot of men who feel like they're fighting to find that need, but they're also being made wrong for wanting to have that need.
Exactly
like the moment
right.
a man gets in a relationship and says, I want to love you, I want to protect you, I want to provide for you, but he has a little standard, like, hey, I'm going to give you all this, I'll literally die for you, but please dress a bit more respectable.
I agree with a lot of what you said, Mitch. The one thing I suppose I differ on is that I don't look at it as being a case of women feeling innately more attuned to like the joy of living or having a sense of purpose just by being alive, right? And men need a sense of purpose to feel alive because of a masculine trait. I think we're socially conditioned into that from a very, very young age into what the role of like a man is, right? But I do agree that they need some sense of purpose because without it, you're just aimlessly going through life.
The male loneliness epidemic isn't being taken seriously.
As a man, sometimes it feels self-indulgent to be able to like have this kind of conversation. If I reflect on like my dad who got up every day and went to work, he didn't have a sick day, he didn't have the opportunity to do that because that was a privilege and a luxury that he could not afford because the lights wouldn't stay on or the mortgage or the rent wouldn't be paid, etc. And I think, you know, as we're trying to figure out masculinity for those men who have the ability to do that, the privilege, then it's almost incumbent on us to have those conversations because like loneliness happens, right? We've all felt it. And I want to get to the why and then the what to do about it. Okay, you feel lonely, so what? What's next? Because in that state of loneliness, you're either going to harm yourself or harm others. And neither option is preferred.
It's a vicious cycle.
I do think there is a big conversation around male loneliness epidemic, but I do think the conversation itself derails from the real issue because I don't think men are asking themselves, why are they lonely? People don't want to look with it and say, I want to do the work. Because I don't think men are out there willing and wanting to do the work. And I do think there is this expectation that we put on ourselves. It also does go into then some men projecting, blaming why they're lonely on other things, relationship, society, careers, rejection, and
Everything else.
but themselves.
Big victim mentality.
Let's go back to the stats and facts like I've done a couple of times during this talk. So what is true? 43% of Australian men are lonely. That's a big chunk. If I was to ask you, would you get on a plane that has a 43% chance of crashing? You would say no, that's a huge chance. Middle-aged men are 3 times more likely to feel lonely. And you are twice as likely to take your own life if you're very lonely. So the conversation for me is less about, are men lonely? Yes, a lot of them are. It's what is the cure to loneliness? And what we know is not the cure to loneliness is the quantity of connections you have in your life.
The quality.
The quality. It's 100% a quality-based discussion, because you can have lots of people you talk to, but talking and connecting are completely different things.
Yep.
Connecting is I understand you. Talking is I exchange information with you. Not a lot of people, in fact, I would say if you have 3 or more people in your life who can say, I truly understand why you tick the way that you do. When men feel like they're not just going through the motions with someone and talking about the footy scores and the weather, but actually more values-orientated discussions, that's when they're like, I can't fucking live without this person. This is my go-to ride or die homie.
100%.
And as you know, if a man is that to you, you will do anything to protect it.
I've got men like that in my life, and I love them so much. Because they are the ones that keep me grounded, they keep me sane.
They're the ones that'll pull you into check.
And they're the ones that are not afraid to tell me when I need to reflect on something as well. Right?
Yeah, they'll call you out.
And I'm grateful because it's built up over time and trust. And I've survived a suicide attempt, and it's a pretty f***ed up place to be. But what you said around the idea of quality of connections really resonated with me because, and I'm sorry for interrupting and finishing your sentence there, Mitch, because for me,
it's passion. I get it.
It was that I had the outside view was, have lots of connections, have it all. The inside, the inner dialogue is worthlessness. It is isolation. It is loneliness. It was real. It was genuine, profound sense of I am worthless and have no friends.
The old school way of stand strong and deal with it yourself is so.
It's not helping men, and we see the consequences.
It doesn't work. Yeah,
at all.
Exactly right. It does not work.
I haven't heard from Dean in a while. One thing that we spoke about was therapy language and how it's infiltrated the mainstream, and you had some criticisms of it. I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
First of all, if someone's been through a serious trauma, therapy is probably a good thing, all right? I also believe that there's been this narrative in the last 5 to 10 years that all men need therapy and all the problems in the world could be solved if men just went to therapy. And I think there's been this over-reliance on this idea that men just need therapy. I've been through it myself and it achieved nothing. I went through almost 6 months of therapy with an ex-partner. We talked through all these issues and at the end of it, it was like, I'm still in the same place. I've still got the same problems. Life is hard. No matter who you are, life is very difficult. Sometimes you just got to step up and do the best you can and keep getting up off the ground and just keep going. I know we have some therapists here in this room. I'm not saying your jobs aren't valid, but I think we need to pull back a little bit on this over-feminization of the world, over-feminization of the men, this massive idea that all men just need therapy and all the world's problems. No.
So the question I have for you, right? What do you define as therapy? Is it sitting down with a psych, or is it seeing a trauma coach? Is it in a men's group where you're outdoors and you're learning about the land that you're living on? What do you consider
therapy? Is it art class? That's something they do for therapy.
I'm talking about the traditional.
So you're talking, see a psych, a counsellor,
the psychologists who sit and they say, "Tell me how you feel," and you talk to them for an hour.
I agree, because that typically just gets you to understand how up your problem is, and it's how to deal with the problem, not get rid of the problems. It's just getting really equipped to hold a ball of fire, and you need to just get less burnt because you know how to juggle it better. It has its place.
It has its place, definitely has its place. I just think we need to be careful a little bit with it, and let's not take away men's strength. And we talk about taking away men's purpose. Yeah, sometimes you just got to be
Therapy's meant to be different from women to men, right? We do therapy for men like we do women. Men need a very different type of therapy.
I know for myself, right, as someone who goes to therapy, if I go see the psychiatrist or the psychologist or whatever, and I take medication, I'm very open about that, right? It's something that helps me. And if I'm taking that medication and then I'm eating junk food, I'm doing no physical activity, I'm sleeping in,
Hit the nail on the head,
I'm doing none of the things, right? I'm not going outside and touching grass and then going, oh man, I wonder why this one pill is not helping me.
So there's no way I would be sitting here today on this panel if I didn't go to therapy. I would be dead.
Wow.
I got diagnosed with OCD when I was 7 because my mum saw me touching the dashboard of her car hundreds of times, blinking over and over, saying the word God out loud on repeat. And the doctor looked at me and said, this is one of the most severe cases of anxiety we've ever seen. And I went the next 20 years struggling with that, depersonalization disorder, which is where you feel like you're floating above your own body and you're about to have a panic attack pretty much all day, every day. It's a living purgatory hell.
Wow.
Depression, and a raft of other things, whilst pretending everything was fine, but on the inside, wishing that something would take me out so that I didn't have to do it myself. People who go to therapy and don't have good experiences, it can happen. I mean, I've gone to therapy and left feeling worse, more invalidated, sicker. But I would say that the vast majority of the time, therapy is worth it. It's about finding A, the right therapist, and B, the right type of therapy. So I don't think I think the point you were trying, maybe, I don't want to speak on your behalf, that you were trying to raise earlier was that sometimes you can wallow around in your situation and become a victim as opposed to taking action. Is that true?
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much, yeah.
So I don't think that's healthy. But I do think that it is worth being patient and persevering to find a fit that professionally benefits you, because there is a vast majority of research would indicate that either way, a professional guiding you through a hard time is a good thing.
Chris, you had friends who had this mentality to tough it out.
Yeah, for sure. So the whole idea of toughing it out has seen probably 10 friends plus of mine take their own lives.
I'm so sorry.
Overdoses. There has been a few that are questionable whether it be taking their own life or not, and that's from the age of 18, and I'm only 29 now. So I believe that we do, as men and women, we need to find the right modality to help us heal, and friends do need to be there to help, and it's not weak to speak in any way, shape or form. But at the same time, it's about finding the right modality to heal. So I think being someone that has lived through a lot of loss, which sucks and it hurts every day, you do need to try and find what best works for you.
The dating world holds men to different and sometimes tougher standards.
So I'm not going to bite on the words different or anything that could be energetically charged. I'll start with what is factually true. So Professor Galloway out of the States has done some research on this, and it shows that men will swipe about 200 times before they get a match. And 1 in 5 people will actually end up on a date. So it basically is 1,000 swipes for a coffee. The bottom 50% of men get no action. The top 10% of men get all the action. So there's a lot of men who are feeling rejected all day, every day. So we've got lost men not feeling needed and then feeling rejected on top of that. So your willingness to want to be incentivized to go out, potentially meet a mate, and get hit in the guts before you find someone that actually wants to spend time with you is why we see the rise of incels and aggression, because we go, well, women, must be their fault. It's like, no, I think that as men, we haven't given enough role models or enough alternatives around what you can do to create value and feel attractive.
I'm bisexual, so I've dated both men and women. And I think for me, dating, the difference I've seen is, yes, exactly what you emphasize on, like women definitely values men that are emotionally available and also like emotionally mature. Dating takes effort, it takes commitment, but compared to, I would say, men, it's definitely more regressive, less emotionally available. You have to actually deep dive a little bit more deeper, which is something that struggle with a little bit more. Rejection is part of just putting yourself out there, but it's the social conditioning, of us men being conditioned that aggression is the only warranted emotion that we can have to anything.
There's also so many scapegoats and easy ways to go self-soothe with porn,
100%.
drugs, games.
Yep.
Like instead of going, shit, I'm maybe a bit of a loser, maybe I'm getting rejected a lot, and again, a bit of an idea of what a man should be, it'd be go to the gym, go work out, eat healthier, pick yourself up, do something about it. But that's easy said than done. Who have they got there to push them? They're probably surrounded by men in the same boat.
In my opinion, Porn has ruined the way that males walk into relationships and dating, 110%. They expect X, Y, Z in a bedroom. If they're not getting what they want out of a female partner, then they think that they need to go find someone else. But then let's add on top social media. You have on your phone, in your fingertips, within 5 minutes, 100,000 women that you can look at compared to whoever you are currently in a relationship with.
It gives men access to a reality that they've never would have otherwise earned.
No, they're never on, they're not even on that level. They're not on that demographic. Like you've got blokes that are on the dole looking at women that would never look at them that are expecting $1 million a year, you know? What do you boys have to say?
I agree with you about porn. I don't agree. I think social media in general is a positive thing. I think the fact that we can all be connected is a very positive thing.
Great.
Modern day dating in general is a lot more successful, productive, and the system works really well. I think the modern dating world probably makes men more competitive. Social media, like I have to compete with you guys. Like, look, you're all hot. I have to see your social media and look at that and go, all right, I've got to compete with this guy now. It's going to make for a better society. It's going to make us all work harder. What do you think is a solution to what you just said? I think what you said is 100% right, those numbers. Do you think there's a solution, or do you think that's how things should be, or do you think that's a bad thing?
I think we need to give men more role models that help them understand that rejection's a part of the process and not to fall into a depressive spiral as a result of that. Every top successful person will say, I am f***ing consistent. And I will get up
100%.
So that is a great trait to have in dating as well, right? When you're like,
I mean,
I've been rejected 200
get a bit creepy
times.
if you're too persistent.
No, not persistent on one person.
No, not that way.
No.
Creepy
Called
is
stalking.
Creepy is persistent to one person. Perseverance is the ability to diversify that until it's reciprocated.
100%, yeah.
And then you have a match where persistence is attractive.
There's two things that I find really fascinating about what we're talking about here. One is this like idea of returning to nature, and a lot of what you're saying strikes me as conquest. Like if you want this, you get this, you work hard for this. I think men need a blueprint that is expansive, not reductive. And so for me, it really strikes me that like the stuff around dating that I find really fascinating is that all of those stats hold true, right? What you said about Scott Galloway. But what I think is so important is to acknowledge the differences that in like heterosexual relationships women and men have on dating apps or in the dating world, right? And that Margaret Atwood quote comes to mind where she says, men are afraid that women will laugh at them and women are afraid that men will kill them, right? And that level of fear that I think women in the dating world feel or in relationships is so profound. And I think when it comes to dating, there's so much about like pick yourself up by the bootstraps, work hard, which I agree with, I think it's great. But at the same time, it's like give men the tools to deal with the human emotions of shame and fear and rejection.
We have to look at society now. Men are not taught how to be men. Like it's not something you are just taught at home. It's not something you're taught in school. Like there are so many reactive men that are just hurt boys and they don't know how to control it.
And turn aggressive.
Correct.
As opposed to staying active, healing,
Exactly
and being in the midst.
Instead of looking within themselves, they're just projecting out.
That's one of the misconceptions around masculinity, that masculinity is stoicism, don't feel the emotions. The reality is you know how to feel your emotions and control them, not avoid them.
100%.
That's a common theme. I think that's very wrong about masculinity is it's not, I don't feel, it's no, I know how to feel and I can do it well.
Okay, thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for sharing what you shared, man.
Nice to meet you, bro.
Nice to meet you.
Interesting conversation.
I feel like that, although that probably deserves a few more hours potentially.
I know, sounds like we could have gone for hours.